Let me introduce you, David, tonight. I just met not too long David, but I am really impressed about the work he achieved and the lessons. So let me share a little bit about David. David is the founder and former CEO of Invesco Real Estate. As a CEO and then an advisor for Invesco Real Estate for 32 years between 1983 and 2015. Invesco is in the funds management business. For people who don't know what that is, it manages money for large pension funds, foundations, and sovereign wealth funds. So, and it specializes in investments in the real estate. David showed up for work that first day in 1983 with no employees, no clients, and no assets under management. Under David's direction, the firm grew into a multinational company with more than 400 employees and more than $65 billion in assets under management. One of the largest and most successful real estate funds management firm in the world. David, again, welcome. How are you? How was this time for you in this pandemic? How was this time, David, for you?
Thank you for the very kind introduction. That was longer than most of my introductions, so I'm embarrassed about that. But very kind, and I'm just humbled to be here. Just flattered to even be asked to do this. I love doing it because of so many things that we learned and all the mistakes we made over the 40 years that I was involved in it. I resonate with I guess the lady who said that it's been productive and it's been peaceful. As you can see behind me, I'm in this beach bedroom of ours. We have a beach place in Florida. And I was down here for some medical things that I was having taken care of. And then when the pandemic hit and the quarantining started, so we just stayed here, and it's just been beautiful. The weather's been beautiful. We would not be down here this long. We've been here almost 3 months now. It's just been a fantastic thing for us because we've had our grandkids here and my kids, and it's just been wonderful for us. You know, I don't want to diminish the pandemic, but anyway, I know it's been a stressful thing for those of you who are still in the marketplace and struggling out there.
Yeah, so it's great that you had a productive time, and I know you are now in Florida, but originally you live in Texas.
Yes, I'm from Dallas, Texas, and that's where our company started many years ago, back in 1983.
So before we start, tell us more about your life, David. What was it like around your family dinner table when you were a kid?
Well, that's a good question. That was actually back when we used to get around the family table. And we had to turn off the TV, and if we were caught trying to peek around the corner to see it, we'd get in trouble. So my early life was very pleasant, frankly. Until I was about 9 years old. My father worked for a large company here called Scott Paper Company, and we were moved to Philadelphia from Dallas. And when I was 9 there, my mother passed away with breast cancer. So we moved back to Dallas so we could be near the extended family. And from that point forward, my dad, who was a business guy, my mom was the glue that held our family together. And with her being gone over the years, Dad kind of drifted away a little bit. And so I kind of raised myself in many ways. I know he loved me, and I knew that. He had great business advice for me, but he was very busy doing other things. And I was kind of on my own, frankly.
David, you said you had to raise yourself. Tell us more about this.
Well, my father wasn't home much, and my sister was for a while. So we were kind of on our own in that he would come home late at night, and he would be out doing things or on business trips. And so we would cook our own meals. I did my own laundry, took care of myself the best I knew how at the time. And my sister played a kind of a mother role there. And so it was, looking back on it, it didn't really bother me. I thought that was normal, but now looking back on it, I see I missed a lot, especially as I married into my wife's family, and her father sort of became my father, best man I've known this side of heaven. And so as I saw my wife's family, and I realized I was blessed to be in that, I got to see what more normal looked like. And there was a woman actually in our neighborhood. I played football and grew up with her son, and she kind of adopted me. And so I got to see their family too. But, there just wasn't a lot of quality family life back then, looking back on it.
Growing up without a mom, your father didn't spend quality time with you. In what ways your childhood formed you for the business world?
I think it inadvertently trained me towards sort of a conditional love, a performance-based love, because when I got a job, I was working since the 7th grade, 8th grade. I'd ride my bike to the grocery store and sack groceries, and worked at a car wash. I had a paper out. All the things I did, I would get praise for those things. He would recognize the work things in my life and not many other things. And so I think I grew up like some of us do, feeling a conditional love, maybe like I had to perform in order to be admired by my dad. And, it's important for all of us to feel loved and admired by our parents. And as men, I know we want to be respected by our fathers. But at the same time, he had a boat. I never saw the lake. He belonged to a country club. I think I saw it once, and all those kinds of things. So I just wasn't included in the daily life.
David, how did you start Invesco Real Estate?
Okay, so I had graduated from college in 1975, the University of Texas in Austin. And I was a pretty unspectacular student. I made B's. Didn't even try to interview on campus because, I was not the academically gifted student that so many of those folks were, and they'd all interview on campus. I found a particular job downtown, or an interview downtown at a bank, and I got in my little purple Opal, put on my one plaid suit that I owned, and drove down and interviewed at this bank. And she took my resume and she stuck it on the bottom of the pile. It's about this tall. And she says, "Don't worry, we'll get to you someday." So I drove that purple Opal home to Dallas, 200 miles north. And my father pointed to this desk in the corner of his bedroom, and he gave me a list of the top 100 companies in Dallas and said, "You make a job out of finding a job." Then he left. And so I sat down at that desk every day and worked on finding a job. And so I was 22. I had a lady at the library who would help me research the companies I was going to go see. And unfortunately, all the data she gave me was on the wrong company. So when I went into this one company, I was telling them financial facts and things that I thought would impress them. And that whole time, I realized halfway through the interview, I was at the wrong firm. But thank goodness the personnel person didn't know that. And I kind of moonwalked back and got back my composure, and I ended up getting the job. So that's how it started, believe it or not. And I ended up in the real estate investments group there by the grace of God, because it was a good place within this large insurance company. And I was so naive, I walked into my boss's office one day after about a year, and I said, "Hey, Bob." He wore cowboy boots and his suit and all this, and a nice guy. And I said, "Bob, when does a person get a raise around this place?" Yeah, that's how stupid I was. And he just laughed. He says, "Shut the door, please. Have a seat." And I knew that couldn't be good. And he said, "It's funny, Dave, we just talked about you this morning just at breakfast, and most of us voted to fire you. But you know what? The big boss, another guy named Bob, said, we're going to give him one more chance." And that's how I got started in business. I became a laser beam at work. I did not want to get fired. I had nowhere to go live if I got fired, and that started my career. So time went on, and I actually did fairly well. To cut a long story short, I was asked to start this business in 1983, and it was a hard decision, but I decided to jump over. And I was at that point, I was 29 I'd taken another job after the bank, and I was asked to leave from that job to start this business. And I was 29 years old when I drove downtown and found my cubicle and hired a secretary, now called an admin, I guess, and began the business.
Wow. So, you said you were a B student, average. You were a little bit naive, and at 29, you took this great, amazing task to start the company, and you did it. We in I don't know how it's in the rest of the world, but here in Romania, people think that you have to be really smart to have not really smart. You have to have straight A's to have success in your career. So I don't want to emphasize that we don't have to have good grades, but tell us, is that still a real thing? What does why do you think you had success, even though you said that you were a B student?
There are many, many kinds of intelligences in the world, and I've seen that over my life. Some of my most successful friends were B students and C students, and I've seen people who didn't even finish school, but there's all kinds of different intelligences out there, and I learned that in college, So I just didn't let that hold me back, that I wasn't the best in academics, and I had people skills and psychology skills and other skills that were important. As they say, it's kind of a funny platitude, but many of the A students end up working for the C students. And that's, in my case, that was true. There's so many more talents that are needed, and so many of those talents are really geared towards how you deal with people, how you get along with people, and how you conduct yourself. And something called emotional intelligence, we call that EQ, not IQ, but EQ. And I had, a pretty good degree of that. And so that was very helpful in me having the confidence to go do this.
But so you said you had people skills. So yeah, you were a B student, but you had people skills. How did you grow in those emotional intelligence or the people skills? Because you said you had confidence.
Well, first of all, when I think I was in the 4th grade or 5th grade, I came home from school. It had to be maybe the 6th grade because Mom had passed away. And I was bragging to my father how I had, the teacher had asked for a volunteer, and I hid behind the crowd so no one would see me, and I didn't get picked. And I went home and bragged about that. And he looked at me and he says, "Do you want to be a nobody the rest of your life?" He said, very direct. He said, "If you want to be a nobody, you keep doing that." And that really stung. I thought, wow. And I was a bit of a leader with my friends. I was always kind of taking charge in a way. So I realized right then it was not the way to behave if I wanted to, be happy in life. So I let my natural leadership abilities kind of take over. And leadership is also learned. You don't have to have natural abilities, but it helps. But it's a lot of learning. And we'll talk about that through some of these questions today. But I began to put myself forward. So I became a captain of my team, and, I did things like that and learned to lead. And so when I had my first employee, I did my best to lead him and started making mistakes, but learned from those and just went forward, being a leader and really learning the important facts around how to be a leader and what a good leader looks like and what a bad leader looks like. And I think one of the most important events in my life was my first leader at that insurance company I just mentioned. He was not my direct boss, but his boss's boss. He was terrible. He was a monster. And he loved picking on the weak link, and I was the weak link. So for 5 years, from 22 to around 27, I was beat up every day. And I was mentally abused, and I was really feeling low about myself. And that trained me for many, many years to this day, not to be that person, but to travel a different road. And I'm very thankful now for that experience. And I am very thankful, and I thank God that I never had to have that particular experience again.
Hmm. So you accept every challenge in your life, or you said more yes? You did volunteering. What were some other things that help you grow in your leadership, for example?
Well, one was through sports. You know, I had a knack for some sports, never good enough to go play college ball, but, you know, I would take leadership roles there, and I got elected captain, and, you know, that was an area. Um, and just in general, just I ran for student president when I was a freshman in high school, and I was, you know, I got that, and that taught me leadership. And so, you know, I just started doing the little things. I didn't try to be the leader all the time. I just let those tendencies come out when I could. But like I said, I don't believe that you have to be a dynamic, natural leader to be successful, but you have to be willing to learn what some of those characteristics are, and you have to be able to step up.
David, what are some of the lessons you learned from your business?
Basically, what I learned in the past 40 years, these things, that real leadership wasn't having to be the smartest person in the room and always having the answers, and, you know, being the stoic figure that went in the behind the curtain and came out with the answers so that you could be the leader that was expected by your company. I found out that was completely false. I learned that through people I talked to, people I watched, and books I read. What I found was the most important ingredient was how you love people. You know, love's the universal language. So number one, I had to love myself. So I had to have a personal center. I ended up calling this the three pillars as I grew older, and grew a methodology for how to lead. So the first was, and I'll tell everybody right now, disclaimer, I'm a person of faith. Okay. I'm a Christian, and that played a big part of my life. And I found that faith through this lady who sort of adopted me, as I mentioned earlier, in my neighborhood. So anyway, I learned I had to be centered, and that happened to me. I started this business, and I was failing. I had no idea how to run a business. I knew how to lead, but how to go get a new client was far beyond me. And one night in a hotel room in Houston, Texas, after about 2 years of trying, I realized I couldn't do it. And a person at dinner that night, another business person in Houston, Texas, looked at me at dinner with his colleagues, and he says, "David, you realize you'll never make it? You have no chance to compete against the top companies in America who are in your space." And the sad thing was, I knew he was right. So I walked back to my hotel room, and I sat at my desk, and I made a list, and I filled up the entire sheet of paper. I remember that. Every line was filled up with all my weaknesses and my inadequacies, and, you know, why I was too challenged for this, why it wouldn't work. And I sat up at that desk, and I got on my knees on the floor, and I put that on the floor, and I just got down over it, and I prayed to my God that he would take this from me, that I would like to get another job. I didn't like this job anymore. And but I said, if you want me to stay in this position, here's what I'll do. You're the new CEO. I just want to be the doorman. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll be the servant, and you take over. And guess what? From that point on, it was not mine to lose anymore. It's like somebody took 1,000 pounds off my back. I stood up that moment, and creativity returned, and the anxiety left, and I truly had given it away. And that became my personal centeredness. The next day in Dallas, I walked down the halls of that building we were in, and I remember having no fear of failure. And yeah, I wanted to succeed, but it didn't matter anymore. I didn't care so much about letting my chairman down or our CEO and all these people I was trying to please. It was no longer mine. So I was free to move forward. It allowed me to hire people that were much smarter than me and more capable than me, because I realized the competition was out there. It wasn't internally with us. So my fear of failure was gone. And I started hiring some of the best people who retired with me and are still there today. I believe that was a God deal, that I met those kinds of folks. And that became my personal centeredness. So that allowed me to be free to, and I'll call that pillar one, that allowed me to really embark on pillar two, and that is building in and deeply engaging our colleagues, our employees. So we started doing that, and the model always flows from the leader, and they could see me as a leader. I was going to work with humility and love, and love those employees and show them that we cared. And yeah, there were tough standards if you wanted to be part of Invesco Real Estate. No doubt about it. We ended up being one of the best firms in the world, but you were given every chance to succeed, and they knew they were cared for, and they still do.
David, great. Great. Before we go to pillar two and explain more, so you said that it was very important for you to have a centered life, and the faith was very important for you. Tell us what helped you to stay firm on your feet, in those. So how did you lead yourself in those years?
That's a great question. I'll tell you how I learned. I'm a person who makes a lot of mistakes, and, we had a lot of failures, and, we couldn't get clients for a while, but then we started to win. But it's through making mistakes that keep you humble, and through failure, and it's through the trials you have in life. And I would, as all humans, I would veer away for a while, and I'd get busy and not spend my time with my maker every morning for a few days. And I would start to lose that center. But the pressure cooker, it's a very competitive world out there. And to stay in business was very tough. And to finally be able to win and compete with the JP Morgans and Goldman Sachs and all these big firms we're competing against, it was stressful. And I believe these trials and these tests keep us humble, and they keep us focused on our centeredness. And they certainly did me. And I was telling Yonat earlier this week, I don't mean to minimize the COVID situation because it's horrible, but for the first 10 years in my business, we had one client. It was a big client, but one client, and every year was like a COVID experience for us. We didn't know if we were going to be in business or not, and how I was going to feed my family. So those things kept me very humble and very focused on my centeredness and my personal foundation, I'll call it.
And what was your hope, Dave, in that time, in the beginning, in the first 10 years?
Well, my hope was during the first 10 years was that we'd survive. Okay. And we had not sold ourselves. We ended up selling ourselves to Invesco for various reasons, but it was just to survive. We never thought about a lot of money or success. It was to be relevant and to survive in our marketplace.
How did you define success in those years?
Okay, so we had sold ourselves to Invesco, and we were learning a lot about being competitive and how we could grow our firm. And we watched some of our mentors. This was a pivotal point in our career. We watched our mentors, and not all of them, but so many of them in a very successful company we knew, they were losing their families. They were, alcoholism was very prominent, other drug abuse, divorce, all kinds of personal failure. And I remember sitting at the table with 3 or 4 of my partners and just getting angry at the thought that that was the price we had to pay to compete in the United States of America. We had to put our businesses first. And we all looked at each other around that table, and that day we decided we weren't doing it. We were going to compete with those firms, but we were going to compete by putting our God and our family ahead of our business. And that was a pivotal moment, and it's still very strong today. There are times you have to work very hard. We know that, and I put in lots of hours, but we never made our families pay the price. We'd cover for each other when there were things we couldn't miss. We would cover for each other, and we never took on more than we could handle. So families came first, and that was success for us, was not to run our lives. The next thing was survive. We wanted to just be a player and not lose. And we had a lot of families counting on us to eat. They had jobs with us, and we had to be successful too.
Dave, I'm pushing on this leading yourself because now in our age with this COVID, everybody wants the formula to, like it's a magic thing that we can do to be better. But what you share, it's basic stuff, but so it's critical in the same time. So this is why I'm asking you about, you know, why is important to the way you lead yourself. So if you think about the Romanian and other young people that are watching this recording right now and the streaming, what would be your advice regarding this, regarding leading yourself?
Well, leading yourself is something obviously only you can do. And you have to decide, as I did, in my opinion, what your purpose is. You know, what's number one in your life? You know, what are you going to tie your rope to? And for me, and again, I will tell you, I'm a person of faith. So I tied mine to Jesus Christ. I was a Christian, and my hope for eternity with him became my guiding star. And so, you know, I was able to have a personal foundation that was solid and didn't move around a lot, so I could take the failure. And then the second thing, and maybe it's all together really in one silo, there's not a lot of silos. The second thing was my wife and my kids. And there's nothing that was going to stand between me and them and being the father and husband I had to be. So those became really my centerness and allowed me the health to be successful so that I could deal with my colleagues. And together we could then deal with the challenges that were called the market, you know, being competitive in the marketplace.
So going back, what would be your advice for students, for Romanian students and graduates, for example?
Well, I would tell you, it's a competitive, very tough world. It's not a fair world either. There's lots of failure that you learn from, and hopefully lots of successes. So again, I would say find your centerness, make sure that you've got solid ground, and make good decisions. Don't get pulled off into all kinds of temptations that are out there, like alcohol and all the other things. I'm not saying you can't have a drink, but I'm saying be careful, because there's a lot of things that you can go overboard on and you can ruin your centerness. Make sure that you commit yourself to your families and the things that are really important. You know, my kids, they didn't even know what I did for a living. They were probably out of high school before they really understood. They didn't care. What they cared about was I loved them and that I was there for them all the time. And I had seen kind of what bad looked like. So get those important things lined up and focused on. And I used to tell at our staff meetings, I'd tell our employees, you know, I'd say, look, if you're not balanced at home, you're no good for us. You know, you're gonna hurt all of us. We have to keep things in perspective at home with our families. I always thank the wives and husbands of our colleagues for putting up with our work we had to do and all this. And I'd encourage them to keep that balance there so we could succeed at the office.
Great. Thank you, David. A reminder for everybody, if you have questions for Dave, please send it to me and I will ask Dave. So Dave, you said is not a fair world, and a question came on this aspect. Did you how the competition treat you? Because I imagine they didn't play fair, and we you know, we live in Romania. We look around and we see a lot of corruption around us, and we look at the other states, Western Europe, America, and we think that you know, it's not perfect, but still they are in a better place than us. So did you face some corruption situations, or how was so this is the question, how the competition treat you, and if you had to deal with corruption, because you said, man, you are a man of faith. So in a way, your faith was tested by being and doing business with integrity.
Yes. You know, in America, we didn't have the same kind of corruption that you're facing from what you've described to me. So I don't pretend that we were tested there as much as we were tested just by the marketplace in general and by very smart, competitive people who would do anything they could to win, but it was not normally corruption. But early on in my career, I was taught, if you're going to do anything, do it right, okay? So if you do a large transaction, we did a $100 million transaction in Beverly Hills, California. And so I had this bright idea. I said, look, we're going to buy golf clubs for 3 of the top guys in this pension fund. And we didn't buy golf clubs. We bought them each a driver, 1 club. And we called them big hitters. And thank you for doing this with us. And it's funny, literally the next day, we had mailed them. The next day, we found out the Attorney General for the state of Texas was starting to investigate gifting of these pension funds. In other words, trying to influence them, and that was corruption. Okay, I was naive enough. I just thought that was normal. And that went on a lot before my time. And so I called them, I said, hey, mail those back. And they came back in the same box we mailed them in. And I still have one in my office in Dallas, sitting there by my bookshelf. And it was a constant reminder, no inappropriate gifting and no corruption at all, because the chances are greater that you will be smoked out eventually than it is that you won't. Now, I don't know your situation or those of you from Romania, you know, how bad it is there, but I can tell you there's 2 reasons not to. 1 is you'll get smoked out eventually. 2 is it's against your centeredness. I couldn't look in the mirror if that's how I knew clients were looking at me and my own colleagues were looking at me. And that's more important to me than anything else, you know, that you have respect and you did it right and you finished strong. So
describe what kind of culture you wanted to build inside Invesco.
Okay, here's what I learned. I used to say it's build a good culture, but that's really not it. Here's how it works. Is you find out, in my world, what it meant. There's a command in the book, I'll call it, the Bible, to love others as you would yourself. And I found out how important it was in Japan to love our folks there as much as I did myself. And so, you know, although their culture was totally different, they could feel that we cared and we became very close. So, you know, we learned that it was about building a healthy environment. And let's say the healthy environment, those components like empowering people and communicating to them well, showing that you care, being fair with your pay, all these different factors, there's a bunch. Those are health factors, and call that the soil. And the more of those kind of factors you plant in that soil, the more things grow, the more a culture will grow out of that. And, you know, cultures grow out of the environment, and they're always authentic. And you're going to have a culture, trust me. It may be a bad culture, but you will have a culture. So we started focusing on doing surveys annually, asking our colleagues, how are we doing? You know, then the bigger companies started finally doing them, and we would always end up on top. It was because we went out of our way, the leaders of the firm, to have a healthy soil with lots of those factors planted. So out of that would grow this great culture that was authentic. Okay. And that culture gets broadcast into the market as your character. So clients get to know your character in the market, that you're an employer of choice, that people trust you. Your admins talk to your clients. Everybody, there are no secrets. So they know what the culture is like within your firm and why it's that way. So that really changed our business. And that was probably the most important thing to me in the entire business, was having that kind of healthy environment that grew a strong culture. And here's the great paradox. When you have that kind of culture, this is the soft stuff that lots of brilliant CFOs, chief financial officers, don't really realize, because it's hard to understand. It's soft, it's hard to measure. But when you get that done, you end up growing your bottom line because you've got long-term stability in your partners and your people. You make enough mistakes, you finally learn, you don't make the same mistakes again. clients love stability. You work together better, and look at your bottom line. 5 and 10 years later, you're growing as a result of these soft issues.
So yeah, that's everybody's like focusing on results right now. What we see as a culture, let's burn people, bring new ones. So how did you show care? How did you show love in Japan, for example, or in the United States? How the employees felt you care about them?
Well, it's the same everywhere. It's telling them, number one, it's drawing up your values that resonate your culture. We have 2 value statements that were very easy to remember and understand, and it had to do with them and our clients and how we were to love each other and forgive each other. I would ask the question many times in our quarterly meetings, raise your hand if you're not broken. We're all broken in one way or another. We're all broken. And I'd say, look, no fighting in here. We got to forgive each other, because if we want to survive, the competition is over there. It's outside. And then you just talk about the balance issue, as I mentioned earlier, and those things. And so that's how they know. So we'd go into Japan or Germany or our office in London, and we didn't try to change their culture, meaning their heritage and their culture from their country, but the non-negotiables had to do with how they treated each other in the humanistic side of things. And so they all resonated with that. And so they would see it, and it's funny how it just transferred. Sometimes it took a while, but it would transfer.
Did you have a way to measure those things?
Well, the way we measured them was we had really robust surveys we did. They were anonymous. Not everybody will ever believe the survey's anonymous, but 90%, 95% of the folks did. So they would express themselves very honestly. And so we could see every year how we were doing. That was a valuable tool. Some people around the bigger company didn't believe it and didn't want to do it. Even one of my partners didn't want to do it. But it was hard to look in the mirror like that and see yourself, especially in the early days. I went home after our first survey and I didn't sleep all weekend when I saw what was said. But it's the way to get naked, so to speak, so everybody can look and know what you're doing right and wrong. And that's a good way. But the other thing is what people say. You hear it. You're with these folks during your waking hours more than you are your own families in some cases.
Dave, this is great. Let's go. You said something earlier about that the clients know your character, or something like that. Tell us more. What was your relationship with your clients?
Okay, well, here's what happens, just to try to explain it simply, is when you get your first pillar right, meaning your centeredness and you're healthy, okay, you can then engage your colleagues, and you can really love them, and you can be fair with them, and they can feel like they're on a great platform to go forward on. That causes great communication, okay? You start having meetings that are superior meetings, robust meetings. We're getting into a little bit of an area here we haven't talked much on, but you learn how to have, we call them war rooms, that allowed us to really talk about our clients and other operational and tactical executional things as well. But just as it has to do with the clients, we could really get in there and get down and dirty around learning more about our clients as we each touched base with them and got to know them well. So we established kind of 3 rules. It was transparency. We had what we call the Invesco report card. So we would tell them what we're going to try to accomplish for them, then tell them at least twice a year how we were doing towards that goal. The other thing was strong teamwork in terms of how we dealt with the client. We had something we call LAMP teams, which I won't bore you with, but these folks would get together and have these war rooms around their clients quarterly and know everything there was to know about them and deal with them in a way that was very coherent and coordinated. And the last area had to do with it's called thought leadership, offering them help in areas that weren't even in our domain. We would get involved with them and help them all we could through research we had, or they needed to move to another building or whatever it was. So we became thought leaders around their whole sector. So those three things is how we engage them. And I've got to tell you, it worked. We never lost a client, direct real estate client during my time there. And we made a lot of mistakes, but it was building trust with your client is what it all had to do with. It's building trust. Remember, we weren't selling our ability to invest money as much as we're selling trust. So if we could sell trust, we would hold on to the relationship, even though the investments we made for them that year didn't turn out as good as we'd hoped they would.
You are in the business of making money for your clients. So tell us, let's speak a little bit about this concept of having money. How much money is enough money, David? And how do you report money?
How much money is enough money in terms of my business or personally or what?
Personally.
Okay. There was a man in the U.S. I've said this for many years. His name is Howard Hughes, and you may have seen movies with Howard Hughes in them. But Howard Hughes was asked that question one time. He had no real personal foundation to speak of. And this guy asked him, this reporter, how much money is enough, Howard? Because he was a billionaire even back then. And he says, you know what? Just a little more. And I have found that to be a true state of the human soul, that at one point, you hope to have this much, and then you get that much, then you need this much, then you find out it really costs this much to retire. And it's something that if you're not careful, it will rob you of your happiness forever. And it's not just money, it's power, position, influence, who you know, all these things. And, as I'm talking here to you today, I started off with this talk, put together the way God had dealt with me for the last 40 years and tried to explain what I did. And I found myself thinking, well, I needed a bigger audience, And what I've learned is you get on your knees, you go back to your centeredness, and you ask your God to help me be content and happy with what I have. And you know what? We're all so blessed, most of us. And that contentment is something I have to seek every day, because you'll never have enough money. And in all the surveys we ever did of our employees, money was a question, and we never finished. Any firm, they have statistics on this, almost, I think it was 50% was the national average on happiness with their money, because none of us are happy with our money ever. I certainly wasn't. I could have done a lot better if I'd done certain things different. So it's a prayer for contentment for me, to not think about money or think about accomplishments, but to think about my core. And that's finishing strong here with my family and other things. And when I do that right, I am at peace, and I am living a victorious life. When I don't, I'm miserable.
You mentioned in an interview, and we spoke about money, but we live in this world, David, that the world tells us if we have worth, if we look beautiful in a certain way, we have a certain position in society. If we look, or if you have a large money, a quantity of money, so if we are wealth, then we are valuable, or we have worth. And I remember that you said in an interview that you didn't base your self-worth, your identity, on the company's success or failure. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, I learned not to base my success or my happiness on my success in any venture, meaning work or money or influence or anything. When you start letting your work define you, you're going to lose, because your work is going to be like a roller coaster. It's going to go up and down your whole life. And I've seen it many, many times with folks that were ahead of me. I watched them. I had people I admired and thought were the most successful I had seen in my area come ask me for a job later because their business had failed. You cannot tie your worth and your happiness to your job. Period, paragraph. If you're going to do it, by definition, you're going to be unhappy, and you could lose long term. In terms of what really is important.
A question regarding this, it's off topic a little bit. Someone asked you, With how much money did you start the first investment? Did you took a loan in the beginning?
No, I was fortunate because what happened with me, I didn't have to roll out on my own and rent my own office and pay myself in this. I used someone else's platform. They asked me to come start a separate business, and they gave me I think it was a 2-year promise, not even written down, that they would keep me around for at least 2 years and give me a chance to get it going. So I didn't have to borrow money, but I had to borrow time. I was not secure in my job. And honestly, for the first 10 years, I had no job security because we could only get one client. We didn't understand the principle of building a great organization. All these things had to be learned around these 3 pillars that we've been talking about. So yeah, it was not a money risk for me. Although when you go out totally on your own, it's got that financial risk component to it. For me, it was a failure risk in being out of a job. I think I might have been able to survive for 3 weeks, maybe, or a month if I didn't have a job. You know, had a lot of pressure on me that way.
Do you think it's possible, Dave, to start this kind of business in our times again, to do it again?
Yeah, it's hard. It's so much more competitive. It's always more competitive. And now today, with the global nature of business, in the instant communication, there are no secrets. There were no secrets then, but now there's really no secrets. It's very difficult, but it comes down to being tenacious and being persistent, having not only a personal purpose, but having a cause, a purpose for your business, that everybody understands your value proposition, and being specific, having a good plan and staying with it. And yeah, you can be successful. And so much of it, again, being smart is a bit of a commodity. I'm not degrading being smart. That's important. We had tons of really bright people, PhD students, master students, all that. But finding smart people is a bit of a commodity. Finding people who know how to get along with other people and know how to attract clients, and finding people who play in a team and use their collective IQs in that team to release the superpower of creativity and things that come out. We called it IQ compounding. Okay, so here's the deal. Here's the big idea that I should have said earlier. If you get pillar 1 right, your centeredness, you get pillar 2 right, and that's how you deal with your folks and how you empower them, you end up having great meetings. We called them war rooms around the most important issues. That released the collective IQ in a room because I was humble, I was vulnerable. The 3 rules of the room were: check your ego at the door, you have an obligation to dissent if you're at that table, and you leave the room as friends, okay? And so we'd have robust discussions and disagreements and all these things. And I guarantee you, if you're willing to invest in a war room like we did, you can figure out how to win. And if you're willing to put the hours in, you'll think up competitive advantages. And we had many of those advantages we thought up in those war rooms that allowed us to compete and beat bigger competitors in the finals for the state of California, New York. We have the 2 largest sovereign wealth funds in China. And it was through the war rooms. How do we get better at operational things and executional? It was the war rooms. It was having great meetings make great organizations. That's the big idea of pillar 1, pillar 2. It allows you to embark on engagement of clients as well as operational and executional skills far better than your competitors. Many of your competitors are built on one guy they call the star. Okay, a star system is great maybe in some businesses, but when it's a complex global business, you want the collective IQs working together to win. I hope that made some sense.
Yes. Dave, one more last question. Speak about the role of growing leaders. Can you share more about having a mentor? Because here at Leaders of Tomorrow, we have a mentoring program, and tell us more why it's important to have someone at this stage in life when people have they're in their 20s to have a coach.
I think it's critical to have a mentor. I've been mentoring young folks for 20 or more years, maybe 30, but I love doing that. And so many people today enjoy being mentors. When I came up, mentoring was not a big deal. This is a true story. I actually asked a guy if he would mentor me. He was very successful in the oil business, and he laughed. He says, "Why would I want to do that?" And I heard that, embarrassed me to death. I turned around, walked off, and never asked anybody to be a mentor again. But the way I learned was through watching successful people and people I admired. Today, it's different. People mentoring, people even pay mentors in some cases, but people mentoring others is really in vogue. And I would highly suggest you find someone you admire and respect, and you sit with them and ask lots of questions. We'd probably have 15 lunches, before we'd break that off, and, they would get everything they did out of my brain, which isn't much, but they would walk away with all they could. And then I was delighted, and they'd take it, and we'd talk every year after that, So yes, do it.
Dave, if you have one more final word for everybody, let us know, and we will close the meeting.
Well, I pretty much already said it all, but I would say stay on your prayer mat if you're a believer, a Christian, or find your centeredness if you're not. If you can, every morning. I know it's exceedingly difficult if you have kids and a job that's demanding, etc. But my performance, my ability to stay balanced and to deal with other people had to do with my abiding with God, as it says in John 15. And so I would highly encourage you, no matter what, make 15 minutes, if nothing else, to spend time in prayer and with Him and centering yourself so that you have your oxygen mask on. You can then go deal with problems, because every day in my career was problems. That's why I look like this, It was always problems. And so that would be my advice. And then try to remember everything I described to you, the centeredness, the way you love other people, as well as how you deal in meetings. The body has many parts, and we're all just a small part of that body. Everything we talked about today was God-based principles. And those principles were made so we could thrive. And I would ask you to think about what we said and to think about how those are God's principles. They're all backed up by verses in my presentation, and see how that makes you thrive.